We also need to address how anti-Blackness is being reproduced within our own organizations and collectives.
I can't hide my Blackness, right? I can't choose what space I want to be in one day or which identity I want to choose.
When you see up close, you can actually understand that most of that work has been done by Black women or Black families.
Las vidas negras importan. It doesn't mean that all lives don't matter, but it means that we are calling for that Black lives matter because our lives really do matter. My name is David Caicedo, or David Caicedo, and I'm the co-director of the Florida Student Power Network.
My name is Chariana Ferrer Núñez. I am an organizer and member of La Colectiva Feminista en Construcción, a radical Black feminist organization in Puerto Rico, and my pronouns are she, her.
I identify as Afro-Latinx, Afro-Latino, also fine.
I actually identify more or feel more close to home with the term Afro-Caribbean because in terms of Afro-Latina, I guess it acknowledges Black and African heritage, but it also kind of dismisses the colonial relation that historical process and the genocide of indigenous Black and brown folks throughout Latin American countries. A lot of people identify it as, Latinx or Latino. It terms like a very whitewashed term and mostly are white Latinos, right? You're still carrying that notion or that concept of Latinidad, which I guess as a challenge, we should actually dismantle.
With the Florida Student Power Network, we work with young folks across the state of Florida, working on issue-based and electoral campaigns, all social justice related, either around migrant justice, climate and environmental justice, or education justice.
So part of the efforts that our collective has recently engaged with was pushing towards policy, particularly pushing for an executive order that the government would address and declare a state of emergency against gender-based violence. So that's a demand that we started 2 years ago. In that campaign, in that collective, engagement towards specific policy, we were met with more state violence. During the different protests that we organized, the police ended up pepper spraying us, beating protesters. 2 years forward, 3 administrations after, it was a political and collective win when the current governor, Pedro Pierluisi, declared a state of emergency against gender-based violence. However, one of the dynamics that we were also met is how organizations that didn't necessarily push for the state of emergency, when we talk about anti-Blackness, it's not just this thing in a very abstract sense of the word or of the concept, or racism in the ways in which the state and the system reproduces this violence. We also need to address how anti-Blackness is being reproduced within our own organizations and collectives.
I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. Really growing up, folks didn't talk about Afro-Latinx, right? It wasn't really a conversation that was had. My parents were very pro-Black, right? Like, you're Black. In school, people would say, you're not Black, you're Colombian, or like, you Hispanic.
So in terms of anti-Blackness, it has been quite difficult, to organize within some of the social justice movements because of the whole el mito de las tres razas, since the national identity of what it means to be Puerto Rican is based on the myth that we are both 3 equal parts of Spanish, Taino, which is indigenous, and Black Africans, it seems like we're part of this mix, and it ends up being a very color blindness narrative. So for us to actually acknowledge, and the spaces that we work with to actually acknowledge the ways in which people are being anti-Black, straight out anti-Black, has been quite difficult.
And now learning the word microaggressions, right? It's like, that's what I've been experiencing from the Latinx community. People just always like, oh, you speak Spanish. Never quite being Hispanic enough, or Latinx enough, or Latino enough. And I think a lot of that is internalized. It has been internalized in me, that it's really taken a lot of unlearning.
Another thing is that in terms of how especially Black activists can engage and build movements here in Puerto Rico has been kind of like up the hill. Most of the spaces, social activism and social justice spaces are being kind of occupied and claimed by very white or light-skinned folks. We have to kind of create our own spaces in order for us to not only fight against the system, but also in terms of us actually engaging with other activists, with other organizations, with other communities.
Yeah, that colorism exists. There's so many folks that are Afro-Latino that don't own it, right? I think you hear a lot, especially I've heard in like Colombian spaces or other Latin American spaces, of like, oh, yo no soy negro, soy canela, and it's like, well, your African roots are definitely undeniable. I can't hide my Blackness, right? I can't choose what space I want to be in one day or which identity I want to choose because I'm visibly beautiful.
First is to acknowledge the work that is being done by Black folks. And when you see up close, you can actually understand that most of that work has been done by Black women or Black femmes. Second, broaden and open the conversation. It's not to include the voices that are not being heard, but actually ask yourself, why aren't those voices being heard? Third option, we need to be accountable of our own actions in order for us to acknowledge the harm that we are, without knowing, without an intention, but we are reproducing to others, and as a way to collective heal, so we can actually dismantle all the systems of oppression, such as other Black feminists before us.
Couple of different kinds of advice, right? One, it's not your fault, right? Whatever way that you're like feeling down about yourself, about the way that you identify, or like the struggles within your identity, because there are systems that intentionally, for us, Afro descendants and folks of the diaspora, the slave trade, right? And enslaved our ancestors that literally cut us off from any roots that we had to our home. More closer to it, right? So many laws that have been implemented that force immigrant communities to assimilate. So like, it's really not your fault that you're having identity issues. Another piece of advice, be who you are, right? Accept yourself as you are, because we're all learning and growing, and there's always space to evolve. My mom always had the saying that she says, nadie nació sabiéndolo todo. You weren't born knowing it all. So I really take that to heart, right? That we're all a process. It's not always linear.
For me, self-care is based on survival. Sometimes in that day by day, we kind of numb ourselves. Self-care is actually denumbing, right? Denumbing and feeling. And if what I need to feel at the moment is pain, well, that's something that will make me feel alive, right? Feeling the pain, right? And feeling joy and resting and having time for me and my partner and my friends and my family. That's part of the ways in I can kind of protect myself.
And Central Florida is just so rich with trails and natural springs. So going to the springs has become one of my self-care practices. I got my hair braided recently, right? It's okay to look good. Not being on call for work 24/7. The work really calls to my passions and it's easy to do that, but it's been an act of resistance and self-care to just even sleep, right? And like not take calls after a certain time.
Kind of felt and definitely envisioned the future as a space of being free, right? And collective freedom and taking care of each other, where all our needs are being met, but also in terms of where we can, just live and not survive.
My hope for the future, that police stop killing us, that governments stop oppressing us, that our peers stop fearing us, fearing the unknown of our cultures. More Afro-Latinx folks don't feel shame in our identity, loving ourselves more as we are, because it's hard, right? There's a lot of systems of oppression that work against us. My hope for the future is that we accept ourselves, that we thrive. We, as the Black folks in this world, the Black folks in Latin America, that we really thrive. We can be our full selves without fear of repression, oppression, murder at the hands of the state or at the hands of others that for one reason or another aren't there yet to accept that. There are so many amazing organizations out there. If you really look, it won't be hard to find. But if anyone does need like an immediate contact, DM Florida Student Power Network on Instagram.
Do some research, find out what are the organizations, right, the collectives that are doing work in your community or in your area of interest, of needs. And if there's not, go ahead and start one. Engage, find out who's doing the work in order for us to, acknowledge all the people that are doing work.
Las vidas negras importan. It doesn't mean that all lives don't matter, but it means that we are calling for that Black Lives Matter because our lives really do matter.
I guess that in order for us to be with and in solidarity with each other is to give what we are lacking. What are you lacking? And can you give that to your comrades? Can you give that to your partner? Can you give that to your friends, to your family, to your community? So always be in solidarity, in anger and with love.
Follow, like.